All right, guys, what's up? Welcome to Ask Truth Apologetics. I am here with Mr. Lloyd DeYoung. I don't think you even have to put that in, buddy. I don't think there's going to be I don't think there's going to be an echo because my stuff has echo cancellation already installed in it. So, anybody watching, if you hear any weird echoes, Lloyd, say something.
Something. One, two,
Okay.
three.
Yeah, so if anybody watching this wants to let us know if we were coming through loud and clear, we'll just get going. So Lloyd and I, obviously, we've been knowing each other here for a while now, doing our live streams pretty much every Sunday for the last 6 months, 7 months. I don't even keep track of this stuff anymore. But one thing that I really like to do is I like to get to know people, and I like you all who are watching this to be able to get to know Lloyd, who we speak to all the time. We obviously know that he's an encyclopedia of knowledge when it comes to Sharia knowledge, Sharia manuals, those types of things. We're also learning that he knows a thing or two about the Talmud and its application and how to read it. But what I'm more interested in, I wouldn't say more interested in, but what I'm interested in is how did Lloyd become all of that, right? Uh, so before we get started, Lloyd, I think everybody pretty much knows you, but for if someone's just scrolling through this and they want to know what you do, you have a YouTube channel, right? You run some stuff. Just kind of give us a real quick rundown of what you do, brother.
Okay, so as you know on my channel, I discuss Islamic law. Hello, Chloe, how are you doing? Hi, XYZ. So I discuss Islamic law, which is the synthesis of all of the scholarly interpretations of the Quran, the Hadith, the Sirah, the biographies of Muhammad, as well as the tafsir. So all of that has been condensed and then put into topics and arranged in a lovely sequence into chapters and topics and order and so on, which then explains exactly how the major scholars of Islam interpret everything that has happened within Islam and how Islam is to be practiced. So the Sharia is the final rulings on how Islam is to be practiced and how it is to be understood. So this is what I do. One of the reasons I came upon this as the proper way to interpret Islam is that I spent nearly just under 11 years, 10 years and 7 months. I lived in the Middle East. I worked in national defense.
Mm-hmm.
I advised governments on how to avoid having assets destroyed by malicious action by groups like Al Qaeda and
Mm-hmm.
so on. So ISIS and others, I've traveled all across the Middle East. I've been to lots of fun places. Um, some of that time under heavy guard,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, so I firsthand witnessed what's happening in the Middle East. I've traveled all around Lebanon. The Bekaa Valley was an eye opener for me. That was the biggest eye opener when I saw what happened to a Christian country, to
Mm-hmm.
Lebanon. How Lebanon had been, I don't know, reduced to poverty, reduced to ruins. How two major civil wars had broken the country, bullet holes everywhere. And then I spent time in the Bekaa Valley, which in the 80s growing up, seeing the fights in the Bekaa Valley and all that, this area. Just seeing how Lebanon was the canary in the coal mine for Europe, for countries like France.
Mm.
So that led me to really want to research and also living there for so long. I mean, I dated a couple of girls from the region, and then you realize how they're living double lives. And then I started to realize they're terrified of being caught because they can literally be killed. And I started to research why, and I could see things, and I started to connect what I was reading with what I was seeing. But then I realized the Quran wasn't enough,
Mm.
and then I studied counterterrorism, and that's when I started to realize, hold on, there's more to this than I realized. And I started to come across documents that I had access to that explained a lot more. Read some of the ISIS documents, and then realized they were not drawing this strictly from the Quran, but from other major sources. There was a consistency there, and that's when I got into the Sharia, started reading it,
Mm-hmm.
and then suddenly Islam just became perfectly clear, perfectly lucid. All
Yeah.
of its doctrines, not just verses, random verses, but actually its doctrines.
Mm-hmm.
So that got me into that. And so that's how I got. And then I just felt for many years I couldn't speak because I lived in the Middle East. It would have been dangerous for me to talk about it. Then
Yeah.
when I moved out, I started to speak about it more publicly. And I decided after maybe a year's worth of reflection to just use my name,
Okay.
not to do it under pseudonym. So
Not to
hopefully
be a
that
weak coward
makes
like myself.
sense.
I
Well,
understand that though.
we can't all be like me, right?
All right, no, it would be very challenging to be as strong, masculine, and handsome as you, sir. Um, so kind of you started to answer one of my questions that I had for you, right? Because as people from the outside looking in, people who have not lived in Muslim countries, people who have not been involved in, um, I would say counterterrorism. Is that kind of how you would explain what your role was in there,
Not
or just
explicitly. I was a
intelligence?
consultant, so I designed wide area, long range surveillance systems for governments.
Mm-hmm.
So I protected borders. I designed systems that protected borders from incursion, as well as critical national infrastructure from destruction and prevented intrusion. So uh, radar systems, which detected humans, small boats, um, vehicles, as well as low-flying aircraft and things like drones, and then slave to cameras, which have very, very high-grade military cameras. So I wouldn't say counter-terrorism specifically, but
Yeah.
um, but related to the field more, I would say national security.
Okay, so I mean, how does studying Islam and specifically the Sharia, how did that help you with your role,
It
or
just
did
helped
it?
me to understand
Hmm.
what was going on, right? Because I would sit in meetings and just listen, and I would hear the various opinions, and I'd see the differences amongst the groups, and I really just became very, very curious, and I wanted to know, and so I just sat there, I listened, I heard a lot,
Hmm.
and lots of speculation, but there was always this consistency between these groups, despite any differences. There was always a certain thread of consistency. So I wanted to understand. I just was extremely curious, and I wanted to find what is the ultimate source,
Yeah.
because there was always I would see online they would discuss the Quran, and some guy would say verse A says slap them until they blue in the face.
Hmm.
Then verse B says be kind to them and feed them, right? And I'd be like, and then A would say verse A, and then B would say verse B, and it would just go in circles.
Yeah.
And I was like, but this doesn't make sense. This is contradictory. Where do we? Where is the actual? Where does the buck stop?
Okay.
And
So,
I
I mean, how
searched.
did you
So
land on the Sharia? What led you to that? Did someone mention the word of it? Had you heard of it somewhere in a lecture? How did
it
you
was
kind of
something
stumble
that got
upon
referenced during. Okay, when I was doing the counterterrorism course, one of the reference I was trying to understand the motivations of ISIS,
it?
right?
Hmm.
And with these heavy debates that were in the forum, or the university forum. And then I bought a book on the subject of Islamic terrorism, and there was a reference to the reliance of the traveler by one of the people who wrote the book, who was an American military strategist,
Hmm.
right, counterterrorism advisor.
Okay.
And I read it, and I realized this book does explain, right? And then I realized, however, that no one was actually using it to the full. They were also just grabbing pieces out, but not actually understanding the doctrine. So I read it. And then I started reading other things that this pointed to. This book would then point to other documents.
Hmm.
And then I started to understand more about how Islam is structured. That that this book will refer to another book that has more detail, and then I would start to cross-reference between these scholars and books, and I'd learn the name of a scholar. Then you'd go find that scholar had a book, and then you'd learn there's this hierarchy of authority, and there's a library of books that are authoritative within a given school,
Okay.
and so on. And so it took me a couple of years at least to piece it together.
Okay.
Didn't happen overnight. I mean, it was quite a maze to work my way through.
Right. So as you're making your way through reading through all these different documents, all these different manuals, um, are you kind of so you're finding the hierarchy, right? So you want to go to the source that explains everything. We call that explanatory power, right? In philosophy, or you could just even use it as a scientific method, right? So I'll use as an example the law of gravity, right? There's a million different explanations you can have for why when you throw something up it comes down, right? You can say, well, the earth is traveling this direction at a very high rate, so it always catches up with it. You could say that there's a magical unicorn that lives under the earth that attracts things back down, right?
No, it's
But
turtles all the way
it's
down.
turtles, it's turtles, or it's noon, right? Or it's we're on the backs of a whale, or whatever it says in some of the Islamic sources. Um, but the gravity, right, explains everything. It explains how things circle the Earth, right? How the larger masses attract smaller masses, and blah blah blah, right? That has the greatest explanatory power, and it explains the universe, right? It explains the actions and behaviors of pretty much everything. That has the greatest explanatory power of how gravity works. So would you say that the Sharia has the greatest explanatory power of the nature of Islam?
Yes,
Okay.
undoubtedly.
And so as you're doing the research, I know you draw a lot from the reliance of the
Oh,
traveler.
a mile just showed up. Christianity is the belief in a satanic human sacrifice.
Mhm. Okay, buddy. So you have my Skype message, or you have my Skype information. We're going to ignore you
Give
for
me
this
one
thing.
moment. I told you that little thing that's going to happen has just happened. I'll be right back.
Okay, gotcha. So he's Lloyd has to go grab the door here for a little bit. So what he's been talking about, guys, is he's been bringing up the fact that the Quran doesn't quite explain fully why Muslims behave as they do. It doesn't quite fully. The Hadith doesn't. The Tafsir doesn't. What ends up happening is it is the Sharia manuals that take into consideration all of um, the different opinions out there regarding what the Quran says, what the Hadith say, what the Tafsir say. Even the Hadith have Tafsir on the Hadith, so there's commentaries upon commentaries. But at the end
Mhm.
of the day, you do need to get to a final ruling, and that's kind of where the Sharia comes into play, and that's where Lloyd has done a lot of his studies. So Lloyd, would you say for a layperson, someone who is wanting to get into understanding it, right? So most Christian apologists have a pretty good grasp of the Quran. They have a pretty good grasp of the Tafsir. They have a pretty good grasp of what the Hadith say. Would you say the reliance of the traveler would be the best source to go to understand the Sharia, so we can get a better grasp of that?
Let me take a step back before that.
Hmm.
If I would dispute that people have, yes, I would say people have a decent understanding
Hmm.
of the overall gist of Islam. However, when you look at the fact that the majority of hadith are abrogated, the
Yeah.
majority of Quran verses are abrogated, then do we really understand Islam in full if we haven't been able to separate the wheat from the chaff? And the only way to do that is in the Sharia,
Hmm.
because the scholars do not read the sources, the raw sources directly. Scholars do not read the hadith directly. They go to what the best scholars, the previous scholars,
Okay.
wrote down as the interpretation of what those hadith
Hmm.
mean and what those verses mean. They have contextual stories and they have scholarly interpretations, and then they also have the application, right? So this is the context that we need. This is not found in the original sources, the Quran and the Sharia.
Right.
So so in many in essence, you can discard those sources because those are there purely for the lowest level of people to play with to keep them happy, really.
Okay.
But the scholars do not operate at that level, and Muslims, of course, want to keep us at the same level. We need to really go straight to the Sharia, which is the final product, because you have the original sources, which are somewhat vague and confusing and
Right.
contradictory.
Right.
Then you've got this process of exegesis, and then you've got the final product. And the
Yeah.
Sharia is the final product, it is the final understanding, it
Okay.
is the final
So
application.
as you were explaining it, I was thinking about how like a movie comes into existence, right? So it starts out with just an outline of an idea, right? You have a writer who's got an outline of ideas, so that might be like the Quran, right? And then they start to expand upon these main core ideas, which would be like the tafsir, and then they bring in these different characters that bring the book alive, which would be like the hadith. And then they finally write the screenplay, and then they make the final cut, final edits, and they say this is exactly what it is. This is exactly what our movie is, and
Mm,
that sounds to me like
yep,
what the Sharia stuff is. Which leads
yeah.
me actually to my next question. So you mentioned Al Qaeda, you mentioned ISIS. I know there's going to be a difference of opinion among Islamic scholars, secular scholars, Christian scholars. I'm just curious as to your personal opinion. Do you think that organizations such as Al Qaeda or ISIS, do you think that they are closer to following the true doctrines
I
of
want to. I'll
Islam?
answer that question. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
pretty. It's confusing if you don't know. Just to answer one or two questions, El Nino said, asked me where I'm from. I'm South African. I was born and raised in Cape Town. So that's just to answer El Nino. Murtad said, Lloyd, would you go back to the Middle East and work there knowing what you know today about the Sharia? And would you spread the good news if you do? Murtad, I I spent nearly 11 years there. I had a good time, but when I left, it was time to go. It's not home. It's a different culture. It's a foreign culture. Um, I I saw what I wanted to see. I did what I wanted to do, and it was time to leave. Um, and also, I'm not really an evangelical Christian. I know I have a YouTube channel and I discuss issues, but you may notice I tend to take it more from an academic point of view. I'm not a preacher. I don't see myself as an evangelist. I see myself really in the role of an educator. And don't forget, my background is not. Yes, I grew up in the church. That is true. I have my family has a long history in the church. However, um, I wasn't hired to preach to people. I was hired to make sure they didn't blow things up and kill people. So I come from a little bit of a different perspective. So really that, um, and then yeah. So Islam has two doctrines that allow Islam to have a dual nature. As we've discussed before, rukhsa and azima.
Hmm.
Azima basically translates. I mean, there's so many different. Any Arabic word has maybe up to a dozen different meanings, right? At
Hmm.
least two or three things. But azima is to do the thing as it is written to do, strictly.
Okay.
Azima is strictness. Rukhsa is dispensation, alleviation. It is a loosening of the rules,
Okay.
right? So groups like Al Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwani Muslimun,
Hmm.
Muslimin, the ISIS, they were following Islam strictly according to the doctrine of Azima.
Okay.
Now, don't forget, it does state that let there be always be a troop amongst you, a group amongst you
Hmm.
who will command the right and forbid the wrong. That is a minority because obviously there was the time that during the battles, Muhammad was losing people who knew the Quran.
Hmm.
So
Right.
some had to stay behind, right? So only a group would go forth and sacrifice themselves. So what you have is Azima is an obligation. It's like an obligation. It's called Fard al-Ain. There's two obligations, well, two basic obligations, Fard al-Ain and Fard al-Kifaya,
Hmm.
right? So it's a communal obligation that is incumbent upon the community that if a small minority, that famous small minority, if they do not do these things according to the doctrines of Islam, if they don't go out and kill in the name of Allah, if they don't kill or find themselves being killed in the name of jihad, in the name of Allah, then the sin of not performing these things falls upon the entire community. So this small group is sacrificing themselves to absolve the rest of sin,
Okay.
to save them from sin, or the entire ummah falls into sin. The rest are allowed to not perform strictly. They're allowed to have a loose approach to Islam. Both of these approaches earn reward from Allah because both are doctrinal, both are correct.
Okay.
So
Okay.
one is more, but they're both correct.
Gotcha.
So therefore, they are allowed to not follow the doctrine fully.
Hmm.
So does that make plain what is meant
It
there?
does. Now, I have a question about so the vast majority of professing Muslims are obviously not in Al Qaeda or ISIS or any group like that, right? But the vast majority of them are paying zakat. So where do their funds typically go? I mean, are they making their way to those organizations, or are those organizations kind of self funded? Do you know? I may be asking you a question you might not know.
So your
the answer
zakat, you
to.
know that Muslims have to pay a portion of their income and taxes called zakat.
Hmm.
At least 15% of all zakat earned must make its way to jihad.
Okay. Okay.
Right. So they are funded by ordinary people who then, so there's at least 14 different kinds of jihad, and they are providing all sorts of support. Right.
Hmm.
There's many different kinds of jihad of the mouth. Like when the mile, also known as the man, also known as Wind Hill, comes on and just waffles nonsense in the chat,
Hmm.
he is he is doing jihad of the mouth because he's weak.
Right.
Understand? This is the weakest degree of faith because he's too weak to go on London Bridge and stab people to death as
Hmm.
those other Muslims did. Okay, the mile is also too weak to actually meet me live in discussion, just so because while he's listening, he has agreed to meet both of us, and he's run away from both of us, which is, in fact, he
Twice.
and all his
Once
friends have done
once
exactly the
as
same.
the man he agreed to meet with us, and then when I blocked him from being the man, then he came on as the mile and he agreed to debate
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. So also wealthy Muslims are required, very, very wealthy Muslims are required to pay a portion to donate money towards this jihad. The vast majority, well, a huge amount of this money actually doesn't go towards war. Well, yes, some of it does go to buying weapons,
Mhm.
stockpiling weapons, and that's like Iran is a major, massive funder of terror. If you read the Iranian constitution,
Mhm.
it states that the Iranian Revolution, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, must be exported to the entire world, and the entire world must be converted. They also state that the Iranian National Guard, right, the Quds Force and so on, their job is not just to defend the borders of Iran, but to export the Iranian revolution to all countries of the world to make war against the entire world.
Mm.
But that is in their constitution. You can
Yeah.
read that. It's in the opening statement of the constitution.
Wow.
So they are government funded. Qatar, Saudi, you name it, they all compete. Now, also, a huge amount of this money is not going just on warfare. A vast amount of this money is going to the elite educational institutions of the world.
Okay.
So the top 13 universities in America, for instance, receive something like, I'm guessing here, but I actually have done shows on this. I actually did run the numbers,
Mhm.
and I actually got official US government figures, and I've actually have done shows on this in the past. But I would say at this point, I mean, look, we know roughly half the money is funded, is traced, and then there's about half that it's just we know it's there, but it's just
Where it
hidden.
is, we're not sure.
Right? Yeah, exactly. But you're looking at least something between $8 and $11 billion has been spent in the last 7 or 8 years
Okay.
on Dawah in universities on basically buying influence, buying, bribing, corrupting, co-opting, converting, and basically, just trying to bring to create, if not sympathy, then direct assistance for the Islamic cause within the major universities of America.
And how do you think that works? Is it just through education? Is it through I don't want to call it. I'll just say it's basically whitewashing history.
All of the above,
Yeah.
all of the
Okay.
above, creating hatred for the country, or slavery, this, slavery, that. I mean, people don't realize, but if you look at George Washington's government, they were writing letters begging the British government to stop sending slaves to North America because they didn't want them.
Mm,
This they don't teach in the 1619 project.
right.
This blacks in America won't teach you. And so George Washington was actually saying, please stop sending slaves to America. We don't want them,
Yeah.
right? So these are things. So basically, what they want to do is create this false narrative, create shame, create humiliation and embarrassment
Hmm.
because you will not defend what you're ashamed of. So they create a false narrative. So you are constantly defending on the back foot,
Right.
right? And then of course they are then spreading Islam as the solution to everything. Islam is peaceful. Islam is moral. Islam is this. Islam is that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And also they will simply bribe scholars to write books about Islam and that whitewash Islam.
Right.
You
Like
yeah,
there
the
was
numbers
a
are billions.
yeah, who
Yeah.
was the guy? I can't remember. I can't remember the name of the guy who he did the how babies are formed. The words escaping me, but he did this whole paper. He went to they paid for him to go to Saudi Arabia. He reads through the Quran, or at least the Quran that they told him to read through, and he says the Quran is incredibly accurate when it comes to child development in the womb. And like, do you think that's part of their initiative is to get these Westerners to agree
Of
with
course. Of
concepts found
course.
in their books and their
I
sources?
mean, what would you do for $1 million, right? If you're ignorant, so understand that they're paying. China's doing the very same thing. For instance, if I don't have the numbers here right now, but I've done shows on this, I have it online. For instance, based on what we did, the show we did yesterday on Israel,
Hmm.
right, and the Torah and the Talmud, people say that Israel is spending money to undermine the West and undermine democracy. So if you go into the universities, right, the amount of money spent by Saudi Arabia alone or Qatar alone is like 2.6, 2.7 that we know of, right? The money that we know of, and we know it's at least double that, right?
Yeah.
You're looking at $2.7 billion or something spread by Qatar alone, okay, to buy influence in the top universities of America.
Hmm.
Israel spent in that same period roughly, I think, a total of 50 million.
Wow.
So you're looking at 50 million versus 2,700 million,
Yeah.
right? And the money that Israel spent didn't go into Dawa, right, into cultural things. It went into biotechnology, for instance, how to grow wheat in arid conditions,
Hmm.
how to improve water, how to drill for water, how to convert water, and so on. So these are there's a very practical aspect to what they were doing. So people want to tell you all sorts of wonderful things, but once you follow the money and start looking at the facts, the story is painted very differently. Lots of obviously corruption of the church, corruption of clerics and things, academics. I
Hmm.
mean, there's one guy, this quote unquote Catholic. What's his name? Considine, Craig Considine.
Hmm.
I've given that guy a hard time before, and I've challenged him, and he eventually blocked me on Facebook because I mean, I would love to speak to that guy, and he knows I'd mop the floor with him when
Yeah.
it
Now,
came to Islam.
what was he saying? I guess I'm ignorant to him.
I mean, he calls, Muhammad was a peaceful man. Muhammad abolished slavery. Muhammad was a feminist. And, Muslims love Jesus, and Muhammad loved Jesus, and Jesus was a great prophet, you know.
Right.
He
Right.
actually used, and the weird thing is, Craig Considine actually speaks in the same way about Jesus as Muslims do. I
Mm.
believe he's a secret convert, but whatever. So
Yeah.
they've bought this allegiance. They've bought this I don't know. They've bought these academics over who are then willing to push their party line, and it's really horrendous to see.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, so to get a little bit more personal with you, thank you for that information. Um, we know you're from South Africa, right? How long did you live there?
South Africa, I left there when I was in my 30s,
Okay, so you
early
lived there
30s,
for
and I
30
moved.
years basically. So you grew up there, lived there until you were
Yeah, I
30.
grew up there.
Gotcha.
Yeah, then I moved to the Middle East.
Hmm.
I worked in the Middle East for just under 11 years. I went back home for like 8 months, and then peaceful protesters burned down my neighbor's house next to me. Then
What were they protesting? Peacefully.
um, they were protesting how their land was stolen, and how they peacefully want property, except they weren't attacking a white community, they were attacking my community. Last I checked, I'm not exactly white, but anyway,
Hmm.
so then the next night they peacefully burned down my other neighbor's house. In both cases, at 1 o'clock in the morning, two Molotov cocktails come flying through their windows, smashing their windows, gutting their houses. Again, in this case, you're looking at four people nearly killed on both occasions.
Wow.
Um, the house is gutted, my house in between, and I'm like, maybe that's the signal to get going. So, yeah, so when it comes to peaceful protest, I'm not a fan, and I decided, you know what, maybe this is 8 months too long in South Africa. Time
Uh-huh.
to leave. So I got up and left.
Yeah. Now, when you were in South Africa, is that where you studied your martial arts and stuff like that?
Yeah, studied in South Africa, studied criminal behavior, criminal thinking. I started teaching some of the stuff in South Africa. Word got around. I got invited to the States. I ended up traveling to the States quite often to teach. Ended up in Europe teaching, and was doing quite well, enjoying myself, traveling around the world teaching martial arts.
Hmm.
I still teach online. I still do some private classes,
Oh,
and
nice.
yeah, I don't look. It's not like I make a big thing out of it. I don't make a career out of it, but it's not an identity. It's just something that I know, and people are willing to pay me for it. So
Right. Well, and I think I saw a video of you. Were you inducted into the Hall of Fame?
South African Martial Arts Hall of Fame, yes, I
Yeah.
was.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that sounds like a big deal. Is that kind of a big deal? Would other people say that's a big deal, Lloyd? I know you're going to be humble a bit about it, but is that kind of a big
Well,
deal?
I mean, I have to defer to my enemies. Like, who's that guy last week? Alfonso
Oh
Harris,
yeah.
the
Yep.
corrupt cop who was shot
Uh-huh.
by the Russians for being a corrupt cop. I mean, he said that your stuff only works on untrained people. That was the funniest thing in the world. Oh man,
Well, he
oh
was a
man.
black belt according to him in was it Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or something like that?
Yeah, he
According to
also
him.
brushes his teeth twice a day and washes under his arms.
Yeah,
I'm
which is
sure.
a huge feat, man. It's tough, and if he flosses, hats off to him because flossing is like really, really difficult to do.
Yeah.
So if he's able to keep that
So
up,
yeah, I mean, I have like um I would think it's a big deal. You're acknowledged for your contribution to the arts, for the
yeah,
work you've done, for your
yeah.
skills, and also wasn't expecting it. This
Oh,
was
really?
entirely by
Yeah.
surprise. I was brought up by surprise. I said, "Hey, would you mind just doing a short demo?" I had
Uh-huh.
no idea there was a panel sitting there watching me, and I had no idea what it was going to be about. And also, I was lucky that there was my battery on my camera died just as that was the last few minutes of battery on my camera. So otherwise, there would be no record of it. So yeah.
Right. Wow. That's,
And I mean, for those who don't know, also I did work, and I have trained as, and I did work as a bodyguard for many years.
mhm.
So I worked in IT, got tired of that, wanted to change, and decided to go into security. So I ended up working in close protection, diplomatic security. From there, I ended up in the Middle East working in electronic security because I have a background in IT and security.
Mhm.
Ended up doing upgrades of security systems, so high-tech security systems, networking, IP cameras, that kind of stuff, because I knew the tech. So I
Right.
started working in that field and ended up following one of my managers into another company where I ended up working in defense,
Okay.
designing security systems for critical infrastructure projects.
Right, which is an interesting combination, right? With the martial arts, the bodyguard stuff, right? And then
Mhm.
the IT work and the information gathering work. It's very cool how the kind of the skill set that you've gained through your youth and early adulthood has somewhat culminated into your ability to understand Islam. And this kind of leads me into my next question because you're obviously highly disciplined and you're highly systematic in your thinking, right? And you're super stupid organized with your OneNote stuff. I don't know if you guys have ever downloaded any of his things. He usually leaves some links on underneath of his videos, but he has like section. He's got sections and subsections of the subsections. They're all like ordered, and there's more information than anyone. You're like a Wikipedia source for the things that you're interested in. So
Mhm.
for those of us who want to be like you, me, what what could you teach someone your methodology? Like, what is your methodology of gathering information?
Now that you mention it, I have wanted to duplicate what I do because I think the more people that know what I know and can do what I do, the more we can be effective out there and just get the facts out.
Hmm.
Now, look, there's always a dispute about the truth because everyone says the truth is, I mean, look, you've got ideologies these days that do not respect the truth,
Right.
right? And so the truth has become this thing that's become a battleground. But I would just go, look, let's look at the facts. Okay, so a fact says what is, I don't know, what does Quran 384 say? That's a
Hmm.
fact.
Right.
It doesn't say bake them a pizza, give them some pocket money, and we know what it says, right? So let's look at what that says. Then let's tie that to something else. So I have thought maybe I need to start do some training. I need to do some classes. I need to educate people. And if you want to do this, the information is overwhelming, but break it down into small pieces. Start with one thing.
Hmm.
What one topic can I cover? What one small item can I cover? And then I branch out.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So you pick one thing, one chapter, and you add one piece of complexity each time. You don't try and eat the elephant with one bite. You
Right.
take a spoonful at a time.
Hmm.
So
You eat an elephant with a spoon.
I'm being metaphorical. Okay,
I would at least say
it's
fork. I mean, come on, dude. Like, I don't know. I don't know.
actually though in Africa we do eat elephants and we do have spoons because Africa is quite advanced today. We have spoons. We even have a thing called electric.
Electric. You mean
Electric.
electric? Or you talking about the dance? Like you got the electric slide.
Now I'm confused. Is it electric boogaloo? I don't know, but it makes the lights go on. It makes the lights
Okay.
go on.
Yeah, yeah. I think in proper American English we call that electric. And that's where they.
See, you guys are, see that's where you guys are ahead of me. Seriously, I'm the evolution is fast catching up in Africa. But
Mhm.
for instance, I'm the first one in my family that's been born without a tail.
Seriously, hey, congratulations, man. I'm really really proud of you for being able
It's
to be born without a tail, but
evolution, man. Yeah. It's
yeah,
so moving on. That was a joke, by the way. Don't take that seriously. For
everybody
anyone who thinks
relax. It's a joke. You can say it. You can say it. I can't say it. You can say it.
so.
It's absolutely fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have notes on my notes, man. That's the truth. Nino Lloyd said you don't do evangelism, but your work is more effective than a lot of street evangelists. Well, thank you. I mean, I just work with facts. I work with the facts. I present the facts, And these are the facts. And I tie the facts to other things. What are corroborating sources? What does the Quran say? Then what does the Tafsir say? What do
Hmm.
other Tafsirs say? Then what do the commentaries on the Tafsir say? Then what does the Hadith say? And then once you move down, what do the commentaries on the Hadith say? And then what does the Sharia say? And if all of these sources say the very same thing, then I think we're on pretty solid ground.
Right, right. And so I mean, basically, what I've seen you do is it's kind of like an algebra equation, right? So you get the Quran, the Tafsir, all the commentaries on the commentaries, right? And then once you see all these things laid out, the equals, right? The answer becomes very clear. Would you
Yep.
agree? And then I
Yes.
think what you've done is you've done that so often to see that the answer aligns with the Sharia, right? So it's almost like the Sharia is the cliff notes of all the answers.
Yes.
It's like the answer key to all the tests. So you've gotten
Yeah.
to a point where you trust the Sharia's interpretation of all this stuff so well,
Yeah.
that you just kind of go straight to it. Does that sound about how you do
Correct. Yeah. These
it?
days, I rarely reference the Quran. Really. And honestly, the scholars don't. The scholars read the secondary sources. They call them secondary. These are the primary sources today.
Yeah. Okay.
Murtad asked me, do you agree that some countries fund these organizations? Yes, certainly. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, even Afghanistan, I mean, Kazakhstan funds a bunch of money on, not all of this goes towards weapons. A lot of it goes towards, as I said, university dawah.
Hmm.
Okay, the dawah is extensive. The corruption of the universities, this is extensive. The fancy English, yeah, well, yeah, okay. South Africa was a British colony, guys. So
Right. And just FYI, I think somebody was mentioning that South African English is closer to British English. I know, but I'm
it is.
American, and as an American, it is my obligation to be as arrogant as possible about everything because I know that we invented the English language and everybody else stole it from us. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. Someone asked about the Quran and the Hadith. The thing is that there's a comment about that. The thing is that Muslims have been trained how to argue on the Quran and Hadith, and that's why they try and drag you down to the lowest common level. Because
mhm,
if you say verse A, they'll say, well, here's opposite verse B. And if you say Hadith A, they'll say, here's contradictory verse B. And it just goes in circles. You never get anywhere.
mhm,
Don't forget, the Muslims alive today are the weakest generation of Muslims to ever live. Don't forget to tell them that. Muhammad said that,
right.
right? They're the weakest generation of Muslims.
Hmm.
Two, the earlier generations were the strongest and therefore the most authoritative. And all of their learning today is based on the authoritative sources from those days. And once you step out of the basic foundational level Quran and Hadith, you then start to get to the facts of Islam. And the final interpretations, which can never be abrogated, can never be changed,
Hmm.
will always remain, is the Sharia and the Fiqh.
Right.
So why bother going to the mess that had to be sorted out
Hmm.
to get to the final product? Just go to the final product.
Right. And so remind us again how the final product came about, right? These are scholars. These are entire university full of scholars, right? Who are reading all these sources that I mentioned. They collaborate with one another, debate with one another for decades, hundreds of years,
Centuries.
and they come
Centuries.
to conclusions. Meanwhile, there's three other major schools that are doing the same thing at the same time. They come to these conclusions, and then
Yeah, so the,
you combine them, and they all pretty much line up. Is that correct?
very much so. Where they disagree is on very minor points, really.
Hmm.
But where they agree is on enough that makes them consistent across the board,
Okay.
right? So they do not disagree on issues that are integral to the understanding of the faith,
Yeah.
right? That leads to then say, let's say Sunni Islam within that group. And the groups were scattered in different geographical regions, so they had to agree on a common set of law,
Right.
right? So they had to agree on common consensus. And so, yeah, there are certain regional cultural differences that were developing. They had to find a common bond to connect the empire, to prevent contradictions,
Hmm.
and to prevent fragmentation. This they had to do. That's why because they're supposed to be the ummah, and they're not supposed to disagree on any points of law, which is according to their Quran, right? According to that they will never agree on an error.
Right.
So the differences also, so within some of the differences, you've got, because they were in different geographic areas, they had different companions that saw Islam a little differently. So they practice according to those particular companions.
Okay.
What people don't understand is that the idea of differences, I haven't done a show on discussing the differences
Mm-hmm.
within Islam, the differences within the schools. But the differences has a name. It's called ikhtilaf,
Ikhtilaf. Okay.
right? Ikhtilaf. And ikhtilaf is actually a fascinating subject. It's a brilliant subject because it describes the Sharia, right? So the scholars would discuss. Now you have many scholars discussing, and then they come up with a ruling. Then that gets passed up to a high level scholar, who then gathers all these rulings from these different groups because they're working in silos,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then across the four schools, there'll be now four schools eventually come up with four rulings, and then the most authoritative of that eventually becomes what is commonly practiced, right? Now you have minority schools, you have majority schools, but what's happened is that certain of these rulings have become the accepted traditional understanding and practice, right? And then, of course, you've got all these Sharia manuals, and then certain of them are more thorough than others. Ikhtilaf, not really conflict, it's difference. Yeah, I guess conflict. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
okay. But typically translated as difference, right? And the scholar who harmonized the differences is a scholar called Sharani, right? And when you read through his work, it's called the Great Balance or the Great Scales, the Supreme Scales,
Mm-hmm.
right? How he balanced the differences, how he harmonized them and explained them as a mercy from Allah and all that. It's really interesting. But what's interesting, there are six major takeaways that they decide that the Sharia teaches man, or when they say man, they mean the Muslims.
Right.
There are six major takeaways. Two of those are that one, that uh, everything is permitted, right? That the ends justify the means and that everything is permitted. In other words, you can do anything because the end, right, the aim that you want to push to
Right. So
is
basically,
justified.
it sounds like there's like a priority, right? If you can do right things and get to the end that you want, that's the best option. But if your right things don't get you there, then you can do a few wrong things. That doesn't get you there, and with more and more and more wrong things. But at the end of the
Winning is
day,
the best option as long as you win.
right, and so
So
that's
the
the only
end,
thing that
so
matters. Yeah.
basically, of the six major pillars of the Sharia, the two that are critical, that are very interesting, is that the ends justify the means and that all is permitted. So in other words, you can violate every rule known to Islam and it's okay because the ends justify the means.
So why, where is the justification for that in scripture? How do Muslims come to that?
Because Muhammad lied. Muhammad
Okay.
broke promises and Muhammad lied. And they say that he only lied in three things, right? One was to keep peace between a husband and wife, so you can lie to your wife. And he lied to keep the peace. Now, this lying to keep the peace, now that's a very broad statement, keeping the peace. So there's conflict between Christians and Muslims. So you want to keep the peace, so you lie. However, according to this, if you lie, according to their scripture, if you lie to keep peace, you're not lying because you're doing good.
Mm-hmm.
So understand. And also, Muhammad states that your action is judged by your intention, not by the outcome. Actions are judged by intention. In other words, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Mm,
So your actions are judged by your intention, not by the outcome.
right.
So if you intend good but you do evil, it's okay because
Right.
Allah sees the heart.
So
It
their
doesn't
so
look
so
at the
their road
intentions.
to heaven is paved in good intentions, basically, right? So they've kind of even inverted that statement themselves.
Say
Um,
again, please. Sorry.
I was just saying it sounds like it's the road to heaven is paved in good intentions. It doesn't matter if the actions are good or not.
The road to hell, man, because it's the road to hell. And then
Well, it's true
Murtad
though.
Muslim asks, did you have any pleasant experiences in the Middle East? What do you think? I mean, I did. I met some great people. The Omanis, fantastic people.
Hmm.
Really, really some wonderful people. Look, Muslims, obviously, they're people. They can be wonderful, hospitable, friendly, polite people. In Jordan, I met some lovely people.
Hmm.
Egypt, well, the guy was Christian, was a Coptic Christian, so maybe not different. Um, Even in the UAE, I mean, there's some wonderful people. I mean,
Yeah.
genuinely wonderful people. Um, but then I've also met some people that maybe weren't so good.
Hmm.
You know, if I had to guess, I mean, look, Dubai. I lived in Dubai for many years, and I really enjoyed it. Dubai was great. I owe Dubai a lot. It did a lot for me career-wise and so on. I did very well there, and it was a benefit to my life. And what they've done in Dubai, what the Sheikh of Dubai has done is amazing. What they've done with the UAE is incredible. I mean,
Hmm.
just incredible. It's an example to all of us what you can do, how quickly you can develop and grow, and how you can work as a mixed group. And it's fantastic. You
Hmm.
know, But so there's a lot you can learn about. So they are, but sometimes when I think about Dubai, I think to myself, if the Sheikh of Dubai was able to abandon Islam, he would. I get that feeling sometimes.
Really?
It's just I
Yeah.
can't prove that, but
Yeah.
it's just that if he could abandon some of the strictures, he would.
Mm-hmm.
But
Hmm.
he's compelled to. So
Yeah, it almost seems like even countries like Saudi Arabia are getting away from their conservative Islamic views, right? I'm like they're starting to consider opening things up to tourism and all those
yeah,
kinds of things. I don't know if you're seeing it kind of the same way I am, but it seems like they're starting to realize like, mm, maybe this isn't the right thing. And then with all the reports coming in from like Iran, right, where they're saying like 90% of them or however much have become apostate.
abandon Islam.
Right. I
Yeah,
mean that shows that people are really being oppressed, but and they're still fearful of admitting it out loud. But there's the concept of the tipping point, right? You get enough people to a certain level, and then it just tips, and the whole thing just goes. And
yeah,
there's
I
the
think so.
I can't remember. I think it's a Canadian imam who's basically saying there's an avalanche coming. It's going to be a tsunami of apostasy.
I've seen those videos. Yeah, no, I've seen those.
Hmm.
Um, Look, I mean, one can hope for the best.
Hmm.
One can hope for the best. We were talking earlier, we've spoken before about, I tend to be, well, we've discussed, I tend to be on the more aggressive side. There are people that try to persuade, but also the people that I'm going after, the arguments that I'm going after, are made by people that are being willfully dishonest, willfully deceptive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm going after the worst of the worst. And I mean, in a previous life, my job was to deal with threats, and I approach it from that angle.
Okay.
And then also I was my job was to make sure that I identified threats and wasn't deceived by them. So I come at these things from a very, I guess, from an almost like an engineer, one as an engineer would, and two
Mhm.
as a as someone in security would.
Right.
My job is to is to be aggressive.
Right. So you were trained to identify threats, right? So you immediately can pick up on that, whereas like a normal person, not saying that you're abnormal, but a normal person might not pick up on these subtle signs, but you see it immediately, and then you are trained to put a stop to it as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Yeah,
Is
correct,
that correct?
correct. Yeah.
What you've actually taught me, one of you and I's first interactions, I was getting ready to do my first debate. Um, and you sent me over a binder. I think it was like of 6 different things of how Muslims are trained to do dawah. Do you remember that?
Yes.
I think it would be great information for you to share that with everybody. Now, you don't have to share point by point necessarily, but what are some of those things? What are they trained to do so that we're engaging when we are engaging with Muslims? Um, we are more well prepared.
I can't remember offhand what that was. It was a while ago. I
Hmm.
did that show with Thaddeus, but they are trained to use sophistry. They're not trained to answer. They're trained to dance around facts, as you know. So you mentioned it yesterday. They'll make a statement and then they'll ask a question. So you are always on the defensive
Yeah.
because you're trying to defend against what they've just stated, which is completely false,
Hmm.
right? They make an assertion rather. When they make an assertion and then ask a question to get you to defend that. For instance, they'll come in the chat and instead of talking about the 7 laws of Noah and saying why one is wrong, they'll start talking about everything but that. They
Right.
always have to move you off topic. You need to keep them on topic.
Hmm.
They always have to. Um, let me take a step back, be a bit more general because I cannot remember offhand. But
Hmm.
when you're dealing with propaganda warfare, there are three major things that the other side has to achieve. One, right? So they've got to achieve what's called information dominance. So they have to control the message. They've got to control the narrative, and they've got to keep you always defending, and they are always pushing the narrative. So one, they have to create shame.
Hmm.
They have to create um, amnesia, and two, they've got to destroy reason and logic.
Okay. So
So one,
let's
to create
yeah.
shame.
Okay.
So you're looking at shame, amnesia, and the destruction of reason, right?
Hmm.
So what you have is one, they create shame. So they will say, you guys sold slaves. Oh my God, you were slavers,
Right.
right? And then you now have to start to provide context, and you're explaining. And when you're explaining
Hmm.
yourself, you look weak,
Okay.
right? But also, they're now making you explain while they are taking ground, you are losing ground,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they are making you so, and also what you feel ashamed of, because they want to cause shame. What you feel ashamed of, you will not defend. What brings you shame, you will not defend. You'll rather be silent about it,
Okay.
right? Two, they want to cause amnesia when they say, but you did this, slavery, right?
Mm-hmm.
They do not mention the parts where actually Christians abandoned and abolished slavery. Britain only paid off its debts 10 years ago because Britain took money to actually abolish slavery around the world. They sent their whole fleet, their navy around the world
Mm.
to abolish slavery by force.
Wow.
Right, so thanks to Britain, slavery was abolished. America fought a war to save 350,000 slaves,
Mhm.
right, to free them. 700,000 Americans died to free 350,000 slaves,
Yeah.
right? So they talk about the Crusades, not saying that the Crusades was a defensive reaction 462 years after the very first Islamic invasion.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at about there was something like 548 battles fought by the Muslims to impose their will and steal and conquer and take land, rape women, steal, destroy, plunder.
Mm-hmm.
And the Crusades are something like 12 battles. So the Muslims fought 548 battles,
Right.
and they want to focus on
Well,
the
they
12 defensive
instigated
battles.
548 battles, right?
Correct.
Then the Crusaders
And they want to
did
focus on these
12.
12s, blow them out
Okay.
of proportion, and ignore the 548 that they're guilty of,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's amnesia. You forget. Because what you don't know, you cannot draw inspiration from,
Right. Right.
right? You cannot use, right? So what you do not know, what you've forgotten, you cannot draw inspiration from. What you're ashamed of, you do not defend. And then the other one's the destruction of reason. They want to simply destroy it because they're using sophistry. There's no logic to what they're
Right.
doing,
Right.
right? They cannot argue on the basis of reason and logic.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, they utilize sophistry. And you need to understand this is a strategy. The way to overcome the strategy is to know the facts, identify when this narrative, when this, when the information is coming in, and you have to attack that point hard, and you've got to turn it around and show the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Short part of the strategy is this. For instance, very very well established in psychology, a group of people are coached, okay, or actors are used. They're going to be pretending to be giving an answer to a problem that the professor is asked, and then the student is brought in, right? These are called the Ash Conformity Experiments, very well established, utilized by military strategists to do propaganda and psychological warfare.
Mm.
So now you come in, you sit down, and they show you a picture of a horse, a bunny, and a dog, and the professor points at the horse and asks, "What's that?" And everyone says, "Bunny." And you go like, well, that's a horse. And it says bunny. And because of the peer pressure, shame,
Mm-hmm.
you eventually go, okay, let's just go along because it's embarrassing. And you
Right.
say bunny too. And eventually you become a good little boy, right? You
Uh-huh.
just do exactly what you're told.
Right. So it's
Now,
gaslighting.
and that's information dominance.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's an actually American military term, information dominance. Now, what has been discovered is that most people will buckle under very rapidly. Now, to overcome this, what happens is if just one person, be it one in a group of five, one in a group of 10,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
If only one person stood up and said, "Horse pucky, horse poop," that's a horse. That's not a bunny. You guys are idiots. You guys are wrong. What happens is that one person who can be heard, who speaks out, will decrease the level of the propagandizing of that group, right? By 80%. He diminishes the effect of the message by
Okay.
80 or more percent,
Right. Which was going to
right?
be my
So
next
he will
question. Yeah, that's good. You're answering it.
he will snap people out of that spell, and he
Mm-hmm.
will also prevent new people from entering it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can diminish propaganda. So the power of one person, if you can just get, that's why they have censorship, right?
Right.
Because they've created such a fragile. Because the thing is that while the spell is powerful, it's also extremely fragile. And this is why Muslims are not looking at further things. So I look at it from a propaganda warfare point of view. What are the tools we need to do? And we have to fight back with the facts.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to spread the facts. So don't engage in their game. Don't play their game. Play your game. Immediately counter everything they throw at you. Those are basic strategies that we all can do. Low cost, high concept.
Right. So, I would almost just say be better at their game than they are. Right. So if they're not the lying aspect of it, right? Not the gaslighting. I think that's we shouldn't do that. But on the aggressive side of creating
Hmm.
that shame, right? And that's a strategy of a lot of apologists and polemicists, right? Is they go directly towards Muhammad. We go directly towards the morality of Allah, right, and all those kinds of things, um, to get them on to the back foot. And me personally, I'm a Western, out in the middle of nowhere type of guy. So I try to play fair, right? But I
But that,
don't think that's
see,
always the best strategy, right?
no, we see because Muslim, it is forbidden. It is absolutely forbidden. It is blasphemy. It is the death penalty for Muslims ever to believe anything bad about Islam or about Muhammad.
Hmm.
Right? It's called Sab al Rasul. Okay, it is blaspheming, just insulting the Prophet, to believe that Muhammad was less than perfect or to believe that Islam was less than perfect. So even if their own scriptures say that Muhammad did something wrong,
Hmm.
that they cannot take that in. They cannot agree to that. They cannot acknowledge that because to acknowledge that Muhammad was less than perfect is sin.
Yeah.
It is blasphemy. It is a crime.
Hmm.
So unfortunately, they've got this incredible cognitive dissonance forced upon them. There was one question in the chat. Veronica asked, "Did you experience people arguing very differently in private than what they publicly would admit to?" Yeah, that is common. But also, I think many Muslims follow what we'd call, I mean, in many cases, many of them have exactly the same morality as Christians,
Hmm.
right? They actually, and they want to have the same. And in fact, they see the world the same way, but their culture, remember, this is one guy who's swimming against the tide. One ant doesn't make he doesn't run the whole system. The system itself is just messed up.
Right.
But many of them just really just want to get along, get on with their lives, and
Hmm.
make money and have a good time with their families and friends.
Right.
So yeah, and, many of them are terrified. Many of them disagree. Many are apostates. They just can't admit it. They'll be killed.
I see. I
Right?
see. So it actually leads me to one of the questions that I did want to get to with you, Lloyd. Is I'll have two questions here, but one, why go after Islam? Why are you focused on that? I mean, there's secularism, atheism. That
Islam is a threat.
okay.
It is a political threat. It is a military threat. It's an existential threat. Remember, 75, okay, 100% of the countries that are Islamic today were Christian,
Hmm.
and to some small degree Buddhist,
Right.
right? Like Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So they have conquered, they have destroyed, they have brought this dysfunction to a vast swath of the world,
Hmm.
huge geography.
Hmm.
So they have huge amounts of money, right? Qatar, oil money, gas money, Saudi Arabia. They are highly motivated. They are committed. They are bringing corruption to universities, to education, to our legal system, to business, to banks.
Right.
They are committed to taking over the world.
Well, and
They
they're focused
have,
on shame. Like the more you mention that shame aspect, right? A lot of the educational system is geared toward the shaming of European, Western, Christian-based cultures, right? Like that's one of their biggest
yeah,
focuses. And
yeah. And look, also,
growing up, that's what I've learned about myself, right? Growing up, I felt like
yeah,
I was not a good person, and my ancestors weren't good people
no, they want
because
to
that's
shame
what I
you.
was
For
taught.
instance, Islam has never abolished slavery. It has never been abolished. It's legal.
Hmm.
Islam had the largest slave trade in history.
Right.
Islam is responsible. So think somewhere between, we don't know exactly, but 350,000 to maybe 500,000 slaves were taken to North America. This means both Canada and the USA. 14.5 million slaves were taken to the nice brown people of South America who were buying slaves too.
Yeah.
Okay, so now you're talking about, let's say 350,000 black slaves from Africa were taken to America, USA,
Hmm.
right? The colonies at the time, not America at the time. So it wasn't even America. They can't even, technically, originally it was the colonies.
Right. Right.
So you're looking at say 350,000 slaves. Now, if you look, the Arabs from North Africa took at least a minimum of 1.5 million slaves from Europe to Africa. So you're looking at 6 to 7 times the number of slaves were taken from Europe to Africa than were taken from Africa to North America.
Right. So when you say from
Right.
Europe, you're talking like French, British, German, Italian,
Yeah, well,
Spanish.
so you're looking at Italy, you're looking at as far north as Iceland, you're looking at Ireland, you're looking at England, you're looking at Sweden, you're looking at Denmark, you're looking at
Right.
remember the Muslims invaded like 30 Christian countries.
Okay. So
That
so you're
didn't invade
saying
them.
traditionally what is thought to be the most oppressive people in the history of the world, right? The Europeans. You're saying that a significant amount of Europeans are actually taken into slavery and captivity by Islamic
Far more than
caliphate
were
and things like
taken,
that.
far more than we ever went in the other direction.
Really?
Far, far.
Yeah.
I mean, look, like the Saudis. I mean, if you look, why are there no blacks in Saudi Arabia today? Well, because they castrated the men and they killed the children, killed the babies that were born, right? So understand that's why you have so few. Look, if you look at the population, 350,000 blacks in America within a couple of hundred years became 30 something million blacks, right? 60 million blacks who went to Saudi Arabia became roughly zero blacks in Saudi because, well, 60 million dead slaves.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very different calculus. Now, why don't Muslims talk about that? Why aren't we discussing that? Right? Why aren't we discussing the tears of jihad? If you look at the violence, the genocide, 80 million dead Indians at least in India,
Right.
right?
So why do you
So
think, as a Western society,
amnesia,
how are we
amnesia,
so? But
propaganda
how are
bullshit,
we so
amnesia.
susceptible to that? Like, why are there not more people like you, Lloyd, who have done the research, the history, and are willing to speak out? I mean, obviously, we can start now. That's what we're doing. But how do you think they were able to gaslight the West? How do you
Because
like?
we are not, we've lost our warrior culture. We've stopped being men. We've stopped. We've been so tolerant, right? We don't stand up for the truth,
Right.
right? We don't draw a line and say, look, I'm a third worlder, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Understand, I've traveled the world. I've been to at least 30 countries. I've been to hundreds of cities. I've traveled the world. But so yes, I have I have a mind that's in two worlds,
Yeah.
African and European.
Mm-hmm.
So understand, but so I see the world with the same eyes that they do. I grew up as a third worlder, and I know the game that's being played. I know the hoodwinking that's going on. I refuse to stand for that, because if I had to choose to live in a third world mentality, a place that had the third world mentality, or a place that had the first world, you know, I would prefer to live in a first world mentality because I know I'm not going to get mugged today. No one's going to try and stab me today. I've been there. I lived like that,
Right.
right? So these third worlders will cheat you, they will lie to you, and they are envious of you. They're resentful of you. They are jealous. And you believe that everyone, okay, when a crime happens, okay, for a crime to happen, there are five stages in the development of a crime.
Right.
One, you have to have intent. You wake up and you decide, hey, I need to do something, right? And then you need to choose your victim. Then you need to position yourself near your victim. The actual commission of the crime is only the fourth step. Okay.
Mm.
The first three stages are all psychological and they're all non-violent. And if you are smart, you can deal with them non-violently up to the third stage.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the closer you get to the fourth stage, because look, if I punch you in the face suddenly because I'm next to you, that's very quick. It could take half a second.
Right.
But you might have had half an hour where you didn't notice this guy sneaking up on you, coming to talk to you. You had half an hour to do something, and you want to do something fancy
You want to
in
wait till
that last
the very last
half
minute. You
second.
want to give. You want to believe the best in people, right? That's what we want to
Correct.
do. We want to
Now the
say,
problem
look, if
is
we
that
love them enough, if we,
now the problem is
yeah.
that when you tell yourself, you see, when you tell yourself, you know, this person wouldn't do that because I wouldn't do that. That's a judgment call,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The moment you make that judgment call for no reason whatsoever, you have just noticed that you have gone into denial.
Mm.
That is a clear, unambiguous signal. You have just entered denial. They wouldn't do that because I wouldn't do that.
Right. So
That's a
that
sign
means
that
you've
tells you're in
noticed they're
danger, things are
doing
about to go
something,
wrong.
right? That means that your
Again?
brain picked up that they were doing something off, right?
Yes,
But
and
you
the conscious mind
rationalize, you go,
goes,
well, would I do this? And you go, no. So of course they're not doing it because I wouldn't do it. But
correct.
so
And the
if
moment you
I'm
do that,
starting,
you are in danger. You're in a danger zone. You need to head on a swivel. Something's going on.
hmm
Knowledge like this, teaching this, training people to do this, to know this, has kept them alive and kept me alive.
right.
I've trained people.
hmm
Okay. So understand. So there's a reason that I'm alive today. Not because, you know, my job was dangerous at times. Understand. I wasn't selling ice cream in the park,
Right.
right? I've had people shoot at me and not from 200 meters away. Okay. Let's be clear about that.
hmm
So I've had to get in people's faces. Right? That was my job. So understand when that happened, and we have been too weak. We have refused to engage in conflict. We refuse to acknowledge it. We're in a war, and we're dealing with a warrior cult, a warrior culture that is intent on domination. And we are just, and we're like, well, you know, we're not people. That's wrong. I'm sorry, but no. You need to understand. They will take everything you have, and they will laugh at you. And Maybe I'm not phrasing it as well as I should, but this is what you're dealing with,
Yeah.
and you need to be honest. You
And
need to rip the veil off.
right. And I think for some people, especially if they grew up in rougher cultures and
So hold on a second.
yeah,
Islam defender Yahya says, want to talk about what is genocide and the killing of the Fakistinians, right, from Fakistan by your masters the Jews. Which now understand that you know that if the Jews had to lay down their weapons, the Muslims would murder every single one because it is the requirement in Islam as worship of Allah to murder every Jew on the planet. Muslims are required to kill every single Jew alive to bring the end times, to bring Muhammad back. This would be an act of worship. That is called genocide. Now, do understand the Arabs living inside of Israel, they're doing just fine. They're doing just fine, right? So understand the Palestinians are also a theocracy. They're just as bad as the Iranians. They're part of Hamas, right? Which is the wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they are sworn, and also if you read their charter, they state that they are following Islam truthfully, honestly, correctly to the highest standards, right? So Islam has called for and requires to bring the end times the murder of every Jew on the planet. So maybe Yahya, you need to learn a little bit of your deen. I know you're too afraid to meet with me to do a Q&A, to do a discussion. I'm well aware of that. You and every one of your weak ass friends is too intimidated to talk with me because you know what the truth is. You know I know what the facts are, and you don't. You know I know your stuff better than you do. So understand. So don't talk to me about genocide when your cult requires the murder of an entire population.
right. And I think it would be good for us to do a whole stream on that because we could go
No,
into it.
Palestine. Look, Ekin, well, see, Palestine. Look, first of all, there's a list. I did a show once, so I should do this again. But let's go through the history of Palestine. If I bring up my notes now, my very well organized OneNote, and we start saying, okay, Murtad, go ahead and disagree, but if if we go through the history of a normal country, you can mention its kings, you can mention its capitals, you can mention its trade routes, you can mention its currency, you can mention its important dates, and you go through Fakistan, those don't exist. This was never a real place. Understand? Because those are simply people from places like Saudi, Jordan, Egypt that simply congregated, took up space because the Jews were actually making the area into a prosperous area once they returned. So, yeah, sorry, go on, please ask.
Yeah, and I gotta actually haircut here in a couple of minutes, so we'll start to wrap up. I think we should just do this every once in a while, maybe monthly. Just
Sure.
this is kind of the conversations, guys, that Lloyd and I just have off camera, and I think it's just really cool just to have this general interaction. I didn't really plan on that many questions, right? I kind of thought I'd ask you about coming to Christ and all that kind of stuff. We'll get to that a different day. I do want to ask you one thing before we go because you've been accused of this, and I just want you to state this out loud. Do you hate Muslims?
No,
Why don't you hate
no.
Muslims?
I have an issue with the ideology. I have
Okay.
an issue with Islam for what it teaches,
Mm-hmm.
for what's in the Sharia. And I remember we recently invited Yahya to a discussion and he turned it down,
Mm-hmm.
right? So no, I don't want to have a debate with you. I want to do a Q&A with you. You see, why does everything have to be a competition? See, all they want is debates where they can waffle on and you got to sit there quietly for 20 minutes while they lie and then you have to rebut. No, no. Let's just me I will just open up your Islamic law, what Islam is based on, and then we'll just read it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the Palestinians were offered a state and they turned the offer down because they wanted all Jews killed. Exactly. They don't want peace, precisely. Read the Hamas charter. Read the Hamas charter. They have a new charter now, which they had to clean up because the old one made them look bad. But read the old charter. It's
Mm-hmm.
disgusting.
And
Okay.
what's tough, and I'll just end on this because I don't want to get off on one side or the other too much yet. But I think we should do a stream on this. Um,
Also, if Hamas wouldn't fire their rockets from inside crashes and hospitals, maybe if they put those rockets, I don't know, in an open field or in a military base, maybe we'd attack those military bases,
mhm.
instead of having to. Besides, those children that are killed, they're dying in jihad. That's a great honor because they get to intercede for 70 of their families, so they don't have to go through they don't have to do the suffering in the grave and all that nonsense and the violence of death
Right,
as they go to paradise. It's just, man, it's a completely backwards.
right.
Check my law. Yahya, really, you should stop lying. The law
Just
of Moses is
just ignore Yah for now, buddy. We got to jump off of here. But one thing I'll
okay.
say
Cool, man.
is I do want to pray for peace, just in general. I think it's really important that we do that. Um, because everybody on every side, whether they're possessed by evil or good, are people. They're image bearers of God. And I do want to remind all of us that there are Christians that are victims on both sides. Now, there's more Christians in certain areas than others, but there's Christians on both sides, and at the end of the day, peace is what we want. But sometimes, Lloyd, you know this very well. Peace is not always an option, and you can't just sit
Nope.
back and do nothing if you see the first three signs coming at you, and especially in the fourth and fifth sign, right, where there's rockets being fired in, and you can point all day long. This person started it here. This person started it there. At some point, somebody's gotta stop if there's going to be peace. But I don't see either side stopping. So we have just started. This will be a fun comment section here. So everybody move your things into the comment section if you want to have a debate. We can do another live stream on this. But I really do got to get my hair cut. You know,
Yeah.
this gray hair
Yeah. Look, I
growing
mean,
out.
yeah. Look, I tend to say what I think, but I tend to be able to back up what I say.
Mhm.
In all the shows, I always provide my sources. Maybe we should do some shows discussing some of these things.
Yeah, I just think it would be
Oh,
interesting. I'm what is it, Switzerland that's in the middle of all this. I'm kind of middle when it comes.
oh, Yahya is required to lie. He says, I mean, we invited him recently and he did not accept. He turned it down. You're required to lie. It's so obligatory for you to lie, Yahya. It is actually a strict requirement for you to do so. And Islam doesn't follow logos.
Hmm. Hmm. All right. Okay.
Okay, cool, man.
So,
Thank you.
Lloyd, thank you so much, man, for joining us. We'll have to do this again sometime. I know you're going to be busy on Sunday, so we'll have to pick it back up again, either probably the following week or hopefully sometime between
Cool, man.
next week and the following Sunday. So, thank you, brother, for watching. Everybody, thank you for coming in, joining.
Yeah.
Move all these chat comments. Somebody start something. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you'll start something in the comment section below, and then we can interact with each other as we move on. So, thank you so much, everybody. Love you. God bless you. Jesus loves you, and we'll chat with you later. See you.
Okay, everyone. Good night.